Well, for more, I'm joined in the studio by our Foreign Affairs editor, Kethevane Gorestani. Good to see you, Kethevane. So tell us about these various meetings taking place in Paris today and what we can expect from them.
Well, look, there's a series of meetings throughout the day in Paris. It started with the French, the Ukrainians, the Brits, and the Germans meeting for the first session. Then there was a meeting of the Europeans with the Americans. Then there was that lunch at the Elysee with sort of the top dogs, Emmanuel Macron with Steve Witkoff, Rubio, and of course the French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot. And the afternoon was really the key of that meeting, which is getting together the Europeans, the Ukrainians, and the Americans in the same room to discuss how to go forward and how to figure out a peace deal in Ukraine. It's pretty significant because we've seen all of these countries sort of stay in contact all the time, but to have them all physically present in the same place and in the same meeting room is pretty important. That said, the French and basically all of the parties involved have said that no real breakthroughs were expected. So they're sort of tamping down expectations. But the fact that the Americans are willing to bring in the Europeans and the Ukrainians does show that the U.S. is willing now to have the Europeans really involved in these discussions as opposed to excluding them the way they have done in the past weeks or past months. And for Europeans, it was a very important moment to sort of speak to Marco Rubio and to Steve Witkoff to explain the position of the Europeans and of the Ukrainians, of course, that Russia cannot be trusted, that Russia is simply playing the clock, that they are not going to come to the negotiating table in good faith. And that's because there's a lot of concern that the United States is being too lenient with the Russians, especially given how Steve Witkoff himself has been sort of lavishing praise over Vladimir Putin and insisting that Vladimir Putin does actually want peace. But besides the warnings about Russia, there are also three elements that are important for the Europeans and the Ukrainians to communicate. One is for the United States to put a little bit more pressure on the Russians to get that ceasefire. Two is to show the Americans that the Europeans are making progress on that so-called coalition of the willing that would bring that reassuring force in case there is eventually a ceasefire and a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. And finally, the importance of continuing to arm Ukraine just a few days after Donald Trump complained that Vladimir Zelensky was always asking for more weapons in a sort of frustrated tone against the Ukrainian president.
Well, let's talk about Russia's position in all of this. How has Moscow been reacting to the developments here in Paris?
Well, look, obviously, no surprise there. The Russians not really excited to see all of these countries meeting and discussing the situation in Ukraine. They've slammed these meetings. Because they don't want to see really the Europeans and the Americans sort of rebuild their cooperation over Ukraine. You had Kirill Dmitriev, who's a very close advisor to Vladimir Putin, who met Witkoff in Washington, D.C. Just recently. He said there are a lot of people, structures, and countries trying to derail our dialogue with the United States. He did not name names, but obviously he was very much directing his criticism to the European Union and the Brits for being sort of the main obstacle in their eyes to peace. And this was something that was relayed more directly by the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, who said, unfortunately, we see from Europeans a focus on continuing the war. So they're accusing the Europeans of being sort of the warmongers and egging on the Ukrainians to not stop this war. But despite Witkoff saying that there's sort of progress with this peace deal, so far Moscow has shown very little sign, if none, to say that they're willing to do something about this peace deal in Ukraine. And for now, Washington and Donald Trump himself has been unwilling to put really any pressure on the Russians.
Kethevane, thanks so much for that piece of analysis.